Ladies and gentlemen, I am Yuzral. It is the 21st of February 2018, and this is the work-in-progress Tier 8 premium destroyer Asashio. There's been a lot written and said about this ship in recent weeks, and this video is going to be me pulling together my thoughts on her and where wargaming might go with the design. 12 hours ago, the quick summary was pretty simple. Tier 10 torpedoes on a Tier 8 hull with Tier 6 artillery, and if you're feeling very charitable, Tier 4 flak. And now that's slightly out of date because Wargaming have announced some changes on the Facebook dev blog. Asashio's artillery is going to be the same as Kagero's, which represents a massive improvement, since about the only ship Asashio could reliably outgun in her current form is the Tier 6 Shinonome. And the torpedoes are being slightly nerfed, with their guaranteed detection range going from 700 meters to 900 meters. That increases the brown alert time from just under 4 seconds to 4.65 to 5 seconds, depending on whether you have torpedo acceleration or not. For reference, the Pan-Asian deepwater torpedoes have brown alert times running from about 4 seconds up to around about 4.8, so Asashio's torpedoes have gone from being some of the stealthiest in the game to being, well, still pretty good, but a hair behind the Pan-Asian torpedoes, which normally get detected at 800 meters. Some of the slower ones still get picked up at 700. Although the only thing that nerf is likely to affect is just how brown the alert is. The extra second or less of warning is probably only going to be a factor in edge cases against an already manoeuvring target. If you're caught broadside in a straight-lining battleship, then you're still going to be in for a world of pain. In addition, Asashio's torpedoes still can't hit cruisers or destroyers. So, going with my experience of the test Asashio and mentally factoring in these changes, well, I'd say she's still very much the hardcore torpedo ninja in a meta that doesn't necessarily suit her. Getting the artillery bumped up to Kagero's standards means that she's no longer a completely trivial kill if another destroyer or cruiser catches her, but that artillery suite is still one of the weakest Tier 8 setups, so it's very much a secondary weapon to the torpedoes. Kagero can at least back that artillery up with surface-running torpedoes, but Asashio can't, so a one-on-one close-quarters fight against another destroyer, say in a cap circle, well, on the scale of bad ideas, it's gone from flat-out suicide to, well, if it's this or losing the game, then Asashio promises to try her best. There just won't be much left of her when she's done keeping that promise. So why are some people suggesting Asashio's overpowered? The answer is her torpedo and the torpedo reload booster. It packs a significant wallop at almost 21,000 base damage per hit, and the torpedo is both fast and long-ranged, 20 kilometers at 67 knots, or 16 kilometers at 72 knots with torpedo acceleration. This has got two consequences. Firstly, unlike most Japanese destroyers, Asashio can easily launch torpedoes from even well outside Russian radar ranges. The other advantage is the follow-through. At 12 kilometers, Asashio's torpedoes typically have about 400 meters between them, like most torpedoes, so you're lucky to get 2 hits in a salvo, even against a broadside battleship. However, those missed torpedoes carry on running, and if there's another battleship behind the primary target, well, like all weapons in World of Warships, these are addressed to whom it may concern. The somewhat typical bow-on death ball of 3 or 4 battleships, a radar cruiser, and a few other escorts that you'll often see eating carrier strikes, destroyers, and anything else that gets in front of it. Yeah, Asashio tends to call that target practice. It's made for some interestingly paranoid battleships over the last couple of weeks. Actually, scratch that. It's not paranoia if there really is a torpedo ninja out to shank you. The torpedo reload booster also plays a significant part. Normally, Japanese destroyers have to trade away their smoke launcher, and therefore their principal panic button, to get this and the 3 or 4 essentially free salvos that it offers. Asashio, however, doesn't have to make this change, and this allows her to have both the advantage in damage output and snapshots that the reload booster offers, and the ability to smoke out like a ninja, or the Batman. It's worth noting that over a typical game, with about 15 minutes of engagement time, it's purely that booster that keeps her theoretical torpedo output ahead of the Pan-Asians and their quintuple 533mm launchers. So, is she balanced? Is she ready to go? That's a tricky one. Asashio is very much one of the oddball premiums, much the same vein as Atlanta. The test version I've had definitely isn't a good fit. She's too situational. She's great at wrecking capital ships, but she's not so good at everything else a destroyer is expected to do in the current metagame, especially in random battles. The new version, well, the switch to Kagoro's artillery partially fixes the fact that she can't engage a cruiser or another destroyer with any reasonable chance of survival, never mind success. I still don't think she'll be able to push a cap without heavy backup, and while the upcoming version might be able to give another destroyer a semi-decent fight, the lack of surface-running torpedoes and the fact that she's still got Japanese destroyer artillery means I still won't take her willingly into a close-quarters fight. Which is a problem because the current game expects destroyers to get into that kind of situation when contesting capture points and scouting. She also only does 35 knots out of the box, so if a Benson or, God forbid, a Fletcher or a Russian destroyer locks onto her, she's in for an interesting time. She also has the same problem with planes as most other Japanese destroyers. If you get spotted by air in Asashio, you're essentially mission killed until you can get fighters or flak to scrape the peeping toms off you. And with no flak of her own to speak of, that means Asashio has to go running to a friendly ship or fighters, taking her out of the battle for a period. The big problem, however, is that even with the changes Wargaming have announced, she still can't practically fight a cruiser. Her torpedoes can't hit them, and even the upgraded guns are of extremely dubious value. So, further changes. I've got a couple of ideas in mind. One is nice and simple, the other is a bit more ambitious. A lot more ambitious, actually. The simple one is to tweak Asashio's torpedoes so that they can hit cruisers, but also to lower their damage, around 18 to 19,000 as a starting measure. That gives her the ability to at least vaguely fight a cruiser that isn't paying attention, cuts back a bit on the battleship paranoia, but she's still reliant on her artillery against enemy destroyers, so still at a disadvantage there. The second option is not to have Asashio as a premium at all, and I think I can explain that before the torch and pitchfork mob gets here. Here's the tech tree as it currently stands, with the Japanese destroyer's sub-branch stopping at the Tier 8 Akazuki. What I'd like to propose, and I may not be the first person to suggest it, is this. Firstly, move Akazuki to Tier 9, and consider giving her the defensive fire option to cement her designed role as an anti-air escort. For Tier 10, add in the project had several names, although it was never built. The Japanese called it Project V7, but it's also known as the Super Akazuki, Chuo Akazuki, Akazuki Kai, or Kitakaze class. The idea was to produce an improved version of the Ducky that could manage just under 37 knots, and loaded either a quintuple or even a hextuple torpedo launcher. And if she really needs it, which is probably doubtful, a slight tweak to the reload rate would produce Tuhu levels of bullet spam. However, that leaves a gap at Tier 8, which is where Asashio comes in two forms actually. Asashio A would be more or less the Asashio Wargaming are contemplating at the moment, minus the separate reload booster that would be in the same slot as Smoke, and limited to the stock Type 90 Mod 1 torpedoes carried by Kagoro and Harakaze. Her plus point? This Asashio would get a gun reload of about 6.25 seconds, compared to the 7.05 of Harakaze 1.4 and Kagoro. The idea is to produce a more artillery-flavoured version as the sub-branch heads towards gunboats at tiers 9 and 10. That trend would continue with Asashio B. This would actually be modelled on her sister ship Kasumi, specifically the refit that Kasumi received in 1944, replacing the X-turret and heavily upgrading the flak. Cut the reload again to mitigate the loss of a third of the artillery, say about 5.5 seconds, and give her the option to replace engine boost with defensive fire in the same vein as the Benson C. The idea, again, is to give a smoother transition to the Akazuki playstyle, introducing defensive AA and the notion of an anti-air destroyer to the Japanese line. That leaves the question of the premium, and I'll admit it, I like the idea of a deep water torpedo ninja as an oddball premium at Tier 8, and there are a couple of potentially good alternatives. The first one is bringing back the old Tier 8 Fubuki, either as one of the Ayanami class as a 35 knot speed destroyer. Amagiri has the historical significance, although Akebono and Ushio probably have better name recognition, or else using one of the other Akatsukis, Ikazuchi or Inazuma come to mind, and giving her a 38 knot top speed. Give her the deep water torpedoes, plus or minus a separate reload booster, and that could make for an interesting premium. Another option, and a somewhat more drastic one, is a Tier 8 Shiratsu. This has the same torpedo setup as Asashio, a slightly lower speed, but slightly better stealth. Shiratsu with the Tier 8 concealment module would get to around about 5.2 km detection range fully stealth, and that would make her the stealthiest ship in the high tier game. The significant differences would lie in her lower hit point total, she'd be one of the most fragile destroyers at Tier 8, and her worse artillery arrangement. She only has 5 rifles, and only 2 of those can fire straight aft. And again, I'd cut the deep water torpedoes down to around 18,000–19,000 damage, but allow them to hit cruisers. That should give a ship that fits the hardcore torpedo ninja brief, but it would be weak to more conventional destroyers and, of course, awake cruisers, but it has a stealth edge, so it should be able to contest a capture point very carefully until cruiser or other destroyers can get on the scene as well. Of course, there is the question of the name, and there are 2 standout candidates to my mind. From a historical standpoint, there's Shigare, one of the Japanese Navy's lucky ships. She's perhaps most notable for being the only survivor of the Nishimura fleet's charge into the Surigao Strait, and one of her captains, Tameichi Hara, quite literally wrote the book on Japanese torpedo tactics. The other major candidate, well, the name is well recognised, I don't think there's any doubting that, but, yeah. Yudachi. She'll probably sell, especially in the Southeast Asia market. The name, as I say, is extremely well recognised, but would it be worth unleashing the apocalypse? Something for Wargaming's marketing and community teams to ponder. And that pretty much wraps it up. Personally, I prefer to see Asashio used to expand the sub-branch rather than put in as a premium, but we'll see how she does in performance terms with the upcoming tweaks, and Wargaming will probably decide from there. I still think, though, that even with those tweaks, cruisers will be a bit too hard of a counter. I have been Yuzral, that has been my thoughts as we come to the end of Asashio's first public test run, and until next time, farewell.